Who do we choose to memorialise in our galleries, and how? Who decides, and what are the wider impacts of these choices on society?
Lieutenant General Thomas Picton is a man with a dark past, but until recently he was solely labelled as a war hero in the interpretation of his portrait by Martin Archer Shee at National Museum Cardiff. We are changing that.
Reframing Picton is an anti-colonial collaborative project between Amgueddfa Cymru, Sub-Saharan Advisory Panel Youth Leadership Network and Amgueddfa Cymru producers. We are amplifying the voices of those originally neglected in the traditional interpretation of Picton's portrait and have commissioned artists with links to Trinidad to create new works that will become a permanent part of the museum's collection.
We are here to challenge you to do the same. No museum is innocent. We want you to listen and learn from our honest experience. Displays which hide the truth behind our portraits can have no place in museums in 2021. It is time for you to recognise the responsibility and opportunity you have.
This presentation contains reference to slavery, torture, and colonial violence. Please take care before listening.
The Faces of Wales Gallery at National Museum Cardiff has a full-length portrait of Lieutenant General Sir Thomas Picton. It was painted by Sir Martin Archer Shee, an Irish-born painter and former president of the Royal Academy.
Picton is shown in military uniform, his right hand resting on the hilt of his sword. At over 2 metres high and almost 1.5 metres wide, he is a commanding presence. He stands in a confident contrapposto the pose of classical gods and heroes. The hazy background hints at ruined battlefields and the romanticised fogs of war. He is illuminated by a soft, almost spotlight effect. These visual devices are typical of Regency war portraits and create a romanticised vision of the military hero.
He painted Picton several times. An earlier example is in the National Portrait Gallery in London. Other posthumous portraits are in Carmarthen and the Royal Collection Trust, among other places. Our version in Cardiff may be the full-length portrait that was shown in the Royal Academy in 1816, about a year after Picton's death.
The portrait was painted in the aftermath of the Napoleonic Wars, which famously ended with the Battle of Waterloo in 1815. Waterloo has gone down in history as Britain's greatest triumph. Picton was the highest-ranked British officer to be killed at Waterloo, and as a result, he was quickly embraced as a national hero.
As a Welshman, Picton was a particular source of pride for Wales. Public memorials and plaques have been erected in his honour, streets, schools and pubs named after him, and eulogies written in his praise. This portrait was a gift from the first Earl of Plymouth in 1907 and was among the earliest group of paintings to enter Wales's new National Art Collection. A decade later, Picton was voted into the Heroes of Wales Marble Statue series at Cardiff City Hall.
This is the narrative that has dominated the museum's interpretation of the portrait, Picton as a war hero, but its skewed representation of history. It ignores the truth not just about Picton, but also about the violence and brutality of Britain's colonial past.
Picton was a controversial figure even in his day. In 1797, he became the first British colonial governor of Trinidad, a Caribbean island which then had a plantation economy based on the labour of enslaved Africans.
He quickly earned a reputation as a violent leader who spread terror across the island. He tortured, hung, decapitated, mutilated, and executed his way into control. Free people, enslaved people, and even his own troops were victims of his cruelty.
When news of Picton's actions in Trinidad trickled back to Britain, it became a cause for concern. At the time, support for the abolition of slavery was going from strength to strength, and people were slowly waking up to the horrors of transatlantic slavery.
Picton was brought to trial in London in 1803 for the torture of Louisa Calderon, a 14-year-old free mixed-race girl from Trinidad who was accused of conspiring to steal. She refused to confess, and Picton condemned her to a brutal form of torture called picketing and later imprisonment. The trial was a scandal in the British press, earning Picton the nickname the Blood-Stained Governor. Picton was found guilty, but the verdict was partially overturned when the Privy Council argued that the form of torture he used was legal under Spanish law. He was never sentenced.
After the trial, Louisa Calderon returned to Trinidad and died in poverty. The only existing images of her are illustrations that show her being tortured. Her story and identity has been almost completely erased, her image reduced to an expression of colonial cruelty. This is an act of violence in itself.
The stories of people like Luisa Calderon and countless other victims of colonialism are hardly ever represented in our galleries, while Picton and other figureheads of empire and imperial violence continue to take up space and continue to be revered.
From the killing of George Floyd and subsequent Black Lives Matter protests to the toppling of Edward Colston's statue in Bristol, events of summer 2020 were a catalyst for change.
While none of this was new, the demands for racial justice reached new levels of public consciousness, as those with the privilege of not being subjected to the first-hand experiences of systematic injustice were faced with the reality of the extent of its legacy. And in the wake of these events, we were all faced with the decision to either watch in the silence that allow these systems to inflict harms on others, or do what we can to enforce positive change.
Many museum collections are deeply rooted in colonialism, with items in our galleries deriving from wealth made directly from slavery or items that are the spoils and treasures of an empire made powerful through violence and oppression of others. Other items, like our portrait of Thomas Picton, celebrate the figureheads of our colonial past, representing them as heroes and presenting a narrow, whitewashed version of history.
As public and cultural institutions, museums have a unique responsibility to society. The more we continue to avoid the truth, the more we perpetuate historical injustices.
We must look to provide a more realistic reflection of our heritage by bringing to light the hidden stories of injustice within our past and in our collections, as well as celebrating the achievements of marginalised communities whose stories are often neglected. As a group of young people and museum staff working together, this is what we aim to do.
Wales is not innocent. Protesting against racial injustice is not a new fight for us in Wales, but June 2020 gave the opportunity for that to really be seen and heard. We saw the power there is in petition, whether that be worldwide, national or local in Wales, and we utilised that.
Cardiff Council voted and agreed on boarding up the Thomas Picton statue in City Hall, following a petition calling out for its removal, which generated thousands of signatures, with the one most public supporter being the Lord Mayor of Cardiff.
Wales's First Minister Mark Drakeford cited the importance of understanding the legacies of the slave trade in the British Empire, and an audit commissioned by the Welsh Government found over 200 monuments, buildings and street names which commemorate people involved in the slave trade, most commonly without an interpretation on their role in the slave trade.
Creation of the Race Equality Action Plan sets out working towards an anti-racist Wales. Black history will be mandatory in the new curriculum, with a focus on the contributions Black people and people of colour have made in Wales, with support from the Welsh Government for museums to be a part of that. Ymgwefr Cymru has committed to becoming an anti-racist museum, and Reframing Picton is part of our wider programme of change.
With Reframing Picton, we made a conscious choice that the decisions should not be made by a group of white curators alone. We wanted the curatorial power to be shared with people who, because of the structural inequalities in the museum sector, don't often have the chance to decide what happens in our galleries.
The main outcome so far is that we have commissioned contemporary artists to create new artworks for the National Collection. These works centre Black voices and will explore ideas around ancestry, healing, transformation and change. They will be ready for display in 2022.
To get started, we spent time drafting out the call-out for the Artist Commission as a team. We were able to design a poster for advertisement that included the portrait of Picton styled in an impactful manner, and we created a document for the call-out stating what we were looking for in an application. We wanted to make sure that Trinidadian artists in particular were represented.
We had a range of artists apply with a variety of experience, but all really passionate about the project. So many of those aligning with our requirements, which made it quite difficult to shortlist to just 7. Each interview lasted around an hour, which allowed us to really understand the artists themselves, their vision for the project, and visualise how we could develop our working relationship with them.
As a team, we then discussed each artist in detail, as we scored it based on criteria created by us that fit in with the vision we wanted for the piece. It was difficult to narrow it down, but we eventually chose 2, all of them understanding about Picton and being deeply connected to the Trinidadian roots. One thing that has been a point of consideration for us is how we are able to handle potential social media backlash. And although we've had many positive comments, we've also had people who were not as pleased about the reframing of Picton.
We've been sucked into the culture wars, accused of rewriting history. We've been called common-purpose Marxists, woke lefties, and a lot worse. This hostility has been a challenge and has forced us to plan carefully in advance, both in terms of our public response and in terms of safeguarding. The toolkit on online abuse in the arts by The Space has been a particularly helpful resource.
Sometimes when you set out to do something that changes societal thought patterns, not everyone will be on your side. It's important to stay strong and understand why you wanted to make that change in the first place. To combat this, we've created a list of answers to potential questions on why we're doing this project and made sure that we were transparent with all our artists about it.
Reframing Picton is a work in progress. We don't know where the project will be a year from now. That's both the beauty and the challenge of co-creation. But that almost doesn't matter because it's the process that counts. This isn't just a 2020 project and it's not just a Black History Month project. It's paving the way for a new way of working and it has to be given time. And it doesn't end with Picton. There is no turning back. Curators of the future have a moral responsibility to tell the truth about the items in our care, however uncomfortable that may be. This is our shared responsibility, and it's your responsibility too.